The morning Ophelia Randall found the last handful of cornmeal in her pantry, she sat down on the rough wooden floor of her cabin and wept until her throat burned raw. 3 years had passed since the telegram arrived about Matthew. 3 years since the War Department informed her that Lieutenant Matthew Randall had fallen at Petersburg in 1864, and she had managed somehow to keep breathing, keep moving, keep pretending that tomorrow might be easier than today. But the truth was settling into her bones with the weight of Colorado winter approaching, the year now 1867, and her small homestead outside Delta felt more like a tomb than a home. She was 25 years old, and she felt ancient. The garden had yielded poorly this season, the well had run low in August, and the chickens had stopped laying weeks ago. Her nearest neighbor was 4 miles east, and she had not seen another soul in nearly a month. Pride had kept her from asking for help, the same stubborn pride that made her refuse when Matthew's family back in Philadelphia offered to send for her after his death. She had wanted to prove she could survive alone, that the dreams they had built together about this land would not die with him. Now those dreams felt as hollow as her empty flour sack. Ophelia pushed herself up from the floor, brushing the dust from her worn calico dress. The fabric had been blue once, bright as mountain columbines, but years of sun and washing had faded it to the color of smoke. She looked around the cabin Matthew had built with his own hands during their single summer together before the war called him away. Solid logs, a good stone fireplace, windows with real glass that he had hauled all the way from Denver. He had been so proud of those windows. The pantry shelves mocked her with their emptiness. A few dried beans rattled in a jar. Half a cup of lard sat congealed in a tin, the cornmeal. That was all. She had been rationing for weeks, eating 1 small meal a day, sometimes less. Her dresses hung loose on her frame, and when she caught her reflection in the window glass, she barely recognized the gaunt woman staring back. Her dark auburn hair, once thick and lustrous, hung limp around her shoulders. Her green eyes, which Matthew used to say reminded him of spring leaves, looked dull and tired. She could not ask for charity. The war had made widows of so many women, and the town of Delta was small, struggling to establish itself in this valley where the Uncompahgre River met the Gunnison. Everyone had their own burdens. She had seen the looks people gave her in church those first months after Matthew died, the pity mixed with relief that it was her loss and not theirs. She had stopped going to services by the 2nd year. Pride, yes, but also something deeper, a wound that would not close. The sun was climbing higher, and she needed to check the traps she had set near the creek. Rabbit, if she was lucky, more likely nothing. Her hands shook as she tied her bonnet under her chin and pulled on the coat that had belonged to Matthew. It swallowed her diminished frame, but it was warm, and it still smelled faintly of him if she buried her face in the collar. Tobacco and pine sap and something else, something uniquely him that made her heart constrict. The October air bit at her cheeks as she stepped outside. The mountains rose in the distance, already snow-capped and imposing. Another few weeks and the passes would close. She would be trapped here until spring. The thought filled her with a strange calm. If she did not make it through the winter, at least she would not have to endure another season of this grinding loneliness, this daily battle against despair. The traps were empty. She had known they would be, but the confirmation still hit like a physical blow. She knelt by the creek, watching the clear water rush over smooth stones, and wondered how much longer she could keep fighting. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache, but she splashed some on her face anyway. Letting the shock of it chase away the fog in her head, that was when she heard it. The sound of a horse moving slow and steady through the trees upstream. Her heart jumped into her throat. Travelers were rare out here, and not all of them were friendly. She stood quickly, too quickly, and the world spun. Black spots danced across her vision. She steadied herself against a cottonwood trunk and waited for her sight to clear. The rider emerged from the tree line, and Ophelia's first thought was that she must be hallucinating from hunger. No man could be that large. He sat astride a massive roan horse, but even the horse seemed small beneath him. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and hung past his shoulders in thick waves. A full beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin clothing, a heavy coat made of bearskin, and carried a rifle across his saddle with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. He saw her and stopped. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the creek. His eyes were startling, a pale gray that seemed to see straight through her. She should have been frightened, alone out here with a strange man, who looked more animal than human, but instead she felt only a strange curiosity. He did not look threatening, exactly, just wildly out of place, like something from another time entirely. "Morning, madam," he said finally. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, but not unkind. "Good morning," Ophelia managed. Her own voice sounded thin and reedy in comparison. He glanced down at her empty traps, then back at her face. Those gray eyes missed nothing. She saw the moment he registered her hollow cheeks, her trembling hands, the desperation she was trying so hard to hide. A muscle worked in his jaw. "You live near here?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Just up the hill, the Randall place." Something shifted in his expression. "You Matthew Randall's widow," her heart stuttered. "You knew my husband. Met him once before the war. In Denver, he mentioned he had a place out this way." He looked past her, toward where her cabin sat hidden in the trees. He did not realize anyone was still living there. "Just me," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "He died at Petersburg 3 years ago." The mountain man nodded slowly. "I am sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but something in the way he said them made her believe he meant it. Not the empty platitudes she had heard so many times before, but genuine understanding. She wondered what losses he had known. "Thank you," she said. "I should get back. There's work to do." He nodded again, but did not move. His horse shifted beneath him, and she caught sight of something tied to his pack saddle, a deer freshly killed, still bleeding from a clean shot through the heart. Her stomach cramped with hunger, so fierce she had to look away. "Madam," he said carefully, "would you object if I made camp near your property? Just for a night or two. I have been in the high country for weeks and could use a change of scenery." She should have said no, should have sent him on his way. But some instinct, something deeper than logic, made her pause. She looked at him again, really looked. He met her gaze steadily, no hint of threat or impropriety, just a quiet question. "There's a clearing about a quarter-mile north of my cabin," she heard herself say. "By the old lightning-struck pine. You can camp there if you like." "Appreciate it," he said. He touched the brim of his hat, a strangely courtly gesture from such a rough-looking man. "Name is Isaac Turner, Ophelia Randall," she replied. He nodded once more, then guided his horse across the creek. She watched him disappear into the trees, heading in the direction she had indicated. Only after he was gone did she realize she was shaking. Not from fear, but from something else entirely. The first flutter of hope she had felt in months. She walked back to her cabin in a daze. Nothing had changed. Her pantry was still empty, winter was still coming, and she was still alone. But something felt different nonetheless. The air seemed clearer somehow, the colors sharper. She told herself it was just the distraction of meeting someone new, nothing more. The afternoon dragged by. She busied herself with small tasks, mending a tear in her bedsheet, sweeping the floor, organizing the few items that remained in her pantry. Every few minutes she found herself glancing toward the window, wondering if Isaac Turner was still out there, or if he had already moved on. She told herself she did not care either way. The sun was setting when she heard footsteps on her porch. Her heart leaped. She smoothed her hands over her dress, suddenly conscious of how ragged she must look, then felt foolish for caring. She opened the door before he could knock. Isaac Turner stood on her porch, hat in his hands, looking almost sheepish despite his intimidating size. "Evening, madam. I hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all," she said, though her heart was hammering. He glanced past her into the cabin, and she saw his jaw tighten when he caught sight of her nearly empty shelves. When he looked back at her, his expression was carefully neutral. "I was wondering if you might do me a favor," he said. "A favor? I brought down more deer than I can eat before the meat spoils. Thought maybe you might help me with it. Hate to see good venison go to waste." It was a lie, and they both knew it. One deer was not more than a man his size could handle, especially with the cold weather helping preserve the meat. But it was a kind lie, one that let her keep her pride. She should have refused, should have told him she was managing fine on her own. But her stomach betrayed her, growling loudly enough that they both heard it in the quiet evening air. Heat flooded her cheeks. Isaac did not react, did not acknowledge her embarrassment. He just stood there, patient and waiting, giving her the choice. "That would be very kind of you," she said quietly. "Thank you." He nodded and returned to his camp. She watched from the doorway, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. True to his word, he came back carrying nearly half the deer, already butchered into manageable portions. He laid it on her small table, the wood groaning under the weight of so much meat. "There is more if you need it," he said. "And I have some other provisions. Coffee, flour, beans." Been carrying them for a while and could use the space in my packs. Another lie, but she was too grateful to call him on it. She looked at the meat, more food than she had seen in months, and felt tears prick at her eyes. I cannot pay you, she said, her voice cracking. I do not have anything to give in return. Not asking for payment, madam, just doing what is right. She looked up at him, this massive stranger who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to prayers she had been too proud to say. Why are you helping me? He was quiet for a long moment. Matthew Randall was a good man, the kind who would have done the same if our situations were reversed. Figure I owe him that much. It was more than that, though. She could see it in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and fragile. Not with pity, but with something deeper, understanding maybe. Recognition. Thank you, she whispered. Truly. He nodded and turned to go, but she stopped him. Mr. Turner, would you like to stay for supper? It is the least I can do. He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he gave a small smile, barely visible beneath his beard. I would like that, madam. Thank you. She cooked that night for the first time in weeks with ingredients that did not need to be rationed and measured down to the last spoonful. Venison steaks, fried potatoes from the supplies he brought, coffee that filled the cabin with its rich aroma. Her hands shook as she worked, partly from weakness but mostly from the strange excitement of having someone to cook for, someone to share a meal with. Isaac sat at her small table, seeming too large for the space, but he moved carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something. They did not talk much as she prepared the food, but the silence was comfortable, almost familiar. She found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. In the firelight, he looked less fearsome, more human. There were scars on his hands, old and white with age. His face, what she could see of it past his beard, was weathered and lined, but not harsh. If anything, there was a gentleness to him that surprised her. When she finally set the plates down, piled high with more food than she had eaten in weeks, she felt suddenly shy. He waited until she sat before picking up his fork, another unexpectedly courteous gesture. This is wonderful, madam, he said after the first bite. Been a long time since I had a proper meal at a table. How long have you been in the mountains, she asked. Most of the summer and fall. I trap during the cold months, sell the furs in the spring. Keeps me busy. That must be lonely work. He shrugged those massive shoulders. I prefer it. Too many people makes me uncomfortable. Always has. She understood that more than he knew. Where are you from originally? Tennessee. Left during the war and never went back. No reason to. There was a story there she could tell, but she did not push. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Ophelia felt strength returning to her body with each bite. The meat was rich and flavorful, cooked perfectly. She had forgotten what it felt like to be satisfied, to not have her stomach cramping with hunger. This cabin, Isaac said eventually. Matthew built it himself? Yes, the summer before the war started. We had only been married 6 months when he left. She traced her fork through the juice on her plate. He promised he would come back, said the war would be over in a few months, and we would have the rest of our lives to build our dream here. I am sorry, Isaac said again, and once more she heard genuine sympathy in his voice. It was a long time ago, but even as she said it, she knew it was not true. Some losses never stopped hurting. Still, he said quietly, loss does not care about time. She looked up and met his eyes. In their gray depths she saw reflections of her own pain. Whatever he had lost, it had marked him just as deeply. They sat there for a moment, two wounded people recognizing each other across a table, and something shifted between them. Some invisible barrier crumbled. Tell me about your trapping, she said, suddenly wanting to hear his voice, to learn more about this strange man who had wandered into her life. He talked slowly at first, then with growing ease. He described the high country, the places where the beaver dams created clear pools and the pine martens made their dens. He talked about winter storms that could bury a camp in an hour, about tracking mountain lions through snow so deep he had to use snowshoes. His voice was soothing, deep and steady, and Ophelia found herself relaxing in a way she had not in years. She asked questions, and he answered them with patience, sometimes even with hints of humor that made her smile. It was fully dark when they finally finished eating. Isaac helped her clear the dishes, moving carefully in the small space. His presence seemed to fill the entire cabin, but not in a threatening way, more like warmth spreading from the fireplace, comforting and safe. I should get back to my camp, he said, reaching for his coat. Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Randall. It was the best company I have had in a long while. Thank you for the food, she replied. I know what you said about having too much. But we both know that was not entirely true. Your kindness means more than you know. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. You should not be alone out here, madam. It is not safe, especially not with winter coming. I manage, she said, though the words rang hollow. I can see that. His tone was gentle but firm, but managing is not the same as living. The truth of his words struck her hard. She looked away, blinking against sudden tears. What choice do I have? I have no money to leave, no family to return to. This cabin, this land, it is all I have left of him. If I abandon it, then everything we dreamed about dies completely. Isaac was quiet. Then he said, maybe holding on to the past is not the same as honoring it. Maybe Matthew would want you to live, not just survive. She wanted to argue, but the words would not come. Deep down, she knew he was right. Matthew would have hated seeing her like this, wasting away in the cabin he had built, too stubborn to accept help or move forward. I will think about what you said, she managed finally. He nodded and put on his hat. I will be around for a few days if you need anything. Anything at all, you just call out. I will hear you. After he left, Ophelia sat by the fire for a long time. The cabin felt different now, less like a prison and more like a home. She could still smell the coffee, still taste the venison. Her stomach was full for the first time in months, and she felt almost human again. But more than the food, it was the conversation that had fed something in her she had not realized was starving. The simple act of talking with another person, of being seen and heard, had reminded her that she was still alive. She slept better that night than she had in years. The morning brought sunshine and birdsong, and Ophelia woke feeling almost energetic. She dressed carefully, braiding her hair for the first time in weeks, and even pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them. She told herself it had nothing to do with Isaac Turner camping nearby, that she was simply taking better care of herself. But when she opened her door to fetch water from the well, she found herself looking toward the trees where his camp lay hidden. She went about her morning chores with more vigor than she had managed in months. The food had restored some of her strength, and she attacked her tasks with renewed determination. She fed the chickens from the grain Isaac had brought, repaired a loose board on the porch, and even started sorting through Matthew's old clothes, finally ready to pack them away properly. It was mid-morning when she heard the sound of an axe biting into wood. She followed the sound and found Isaac near her woodpile, or what had been her woodpile. He had already split enough logs to last her a month, and he showed no signs of stopping. His coat was hanging from a nearby branch, and despite the cool October air, sweat darkened his shirt across his shoulders and back. The muscles in his arms bunched and flexed with each swing of the axe, and she found herself transfixed by the display of raw strength. He saw her and stopped, lowering the axe. "Morning, madam. Hope the noise did not disturb you." "Not at all. But Mr. Turner, you do not have to do this." "Need the exercise," he said simply. "Been sitting around camp too long. Getting soft." She almost laughed. There was nothing soft about Isaac Turner. He was all hard plains and solid muscle, built like the mountains themselves. But she appreciated the fiction he was maintaining, this pretense that he was helping himself rather than her. "At least let me bring you some water," she said. "And there is coffee still hot on the stove." His face lit up at the mention of coffee, and she realized he probably had been rationing his own supplies far more than he let on. "That would be welcome, thank you." She brought him a tin cup of coffee and a dipper of cold well water. He drank the water in one long pull, his throat working, then sipped the coffee more slowly, savoring it. She noticed a scar running along his left forearm, thick and ropey like a burn mark. "How did that happen?" she asked, then immediately felt embarrassed by her forwardness. "I apologize, that was rude." "Not rude," he said, looking down at the scar. "Fire during the war. Artillery shell exploded too close. I was one of the lucky ones. Most of my unit was not." "You fought?" She had assumed as much, but hearing him confirm it made her see him differently. He and Matthew might have stood on the same battlefields, faced the same horrors. "For a while. Until I could not anymore." His voice went flat. "Saw things that made me lose faith in humanity. When it was over, I just kept walking west until I ran out of people." "And did you? Lose faith, I mean?" He looked at her, really looked, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. Most of it, but maybe not all. Still trying to figure that out. She wanted to ask more, but he turned back to the woodpile, clearly done with that particular conversation. She left him to his work and went back inside. But she found herself constantly drawn to the window, watching him split log after log with methodical precision. By afternoon he had moved on to repairing her chicken coop, which had been listing badly to one side. Then he climbed onto her roof to replace some missing shingles she had not even realized were gone. He worked steadily, never rushing but never stopping, and Ophelia felt a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. She wanted to help, to contribute something, but she also knew her weakened state would only slow him down. Instead, she cooked. She made biscuits from the flour he had brought, simmered beans with the salt pork from his supplies, and even attempted a dried apple pie using fruit she had put up the previous autumn. It felt good to work in the kitchen again, to create something with her hands. When Isaac finally knocked on her door at sunset, she had a full meal waiting. His eyes widened when he saw the table laid out, and something like wonder crossed his face. "Mrs. Randall, you did not have to go to all this trouble." "It is no trouble," she said. "After everything you have done today, it is the least I can offer." They fell into an easy routine over the meal. He told her about a bear he had encountered in the high country, how they had regarded each other for a long moment before the bear simply turned and walked away. She told him about the first winter she and Matthew had spent here, how they had nearly run out of firewood in February and had to burn furniture to stay warm. "You could have frozen to death," Isaac said, his voice tight with concern. "We almost did, but we survived. Somehow we always survived." Until Matthew had not, she did not say, but they both heard it. "You are stronger than you know," Isaac said quietly. "Not many people could do what you have done. I have not had a choice. There is always a choice. You chose to keep fighting. That takes courage." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. She had not felt courageous. She had felt desperate, broken, barely hanging on. But maybe he was right. Maybe simply continuing to breathe, to wake up each morning and face another day, was its own form of bravery. After dinner, Isaac surprised her by pulling out a harmonica from his pocket. "Do you mind?" he asked. "Been a while since I played for anyone." "Please," she said, settling into her chair by the fire. He played slowly at first, simple melodies that sounded like lullabies. Then he shifted to something livelier, a dance tune that made her foot tap despite herself. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt something close to contentment. When he finally stopped, full darkness had fallen outside. He stood, clearly reluctant to leave, but knowing he should. "Mr. Turner," Ophelia said before she could stop herself. "Isaac, would you like to stay? In the cabin, I mean. It is going to be cold tonight, and there is no reason for you to freeze in a tent when there is a perfectly good fireplace here." He froze, and she rushed on. "You could sleep by the fire. I have extra blankets. It would be more comfortable than the ground, and I would feel safer knowing someone was nearby." It was partially true, but more than safety, she simply did not want to be alone. Not tonight. Not after tasting what it felt like to have company again, to hear another voice, to share space with someone who seemed to understand her in ways no one else had. "I would not want to impose," Isaac said carefully, "or damage your reputation. People might talk. Let them talk. I have been the subject of gossip since Matthew died. At this point, I do not care what people think." She met his eyes. "Please stay." He nodded slowly. "If you are certain, I am." He fetched his bedroll from his camp, and she made up a pallet near the fireplace. It was strange having him in the cabin, this large man who seemed to fill every corner with his presence, but it was not uncomfortable. If anything, it felt right, like a missing piece sliding into place. They talked for a while longer, their voices quiet in the firelit darkness. She learned that he was 29 years old, that he had grown up on a farm before the war, that he had once been engaged to a girl named Sarah, who had married his brother when Isaac did not return. He told her this matter-of-factly, without bitterness, but she heard the old wound beneath the words. "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked. "To Tennessee?" "Nothing there for me now. My parents passed during the war. My brother has his own life. I am a ghost to them. Better to stay that way." "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "Like you are haunting your own life." "Exactly." He looked at her across the small room. "But maybe we are both more alive than we think. Maybe we just needed reminding." She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made her pulse quicken. She was not ready for whatever this was, this unexpected connection with a stranger, but she could not deny it was there, growing stronger with each passing hour. "Good night, Isaac," she said, standing before her thoughts could carry her somewhere dangerous. "Good night, Ophelia," he replied, using her first name for the first time. It sounded right in his deep voice, like it belonged there. She retreated to her bed in the small back room, but sleep eluded her. She could hear Isaac moving quietly near the fireplace, settling in for the night. The knowledge that he was there, just on the other side of the thin wall, filled her with a confusing mix of comfort and something else. Something she had not felt since Matthew left for war. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, with clouds heavy with snow hanging low over the mountains. Ophelia woke to find Isaac already up, the fire stoked high and coffee brewing. He had even made breakfast, frying salt pork and cornmeal mush. "You did not have to do that," she said, touched by the gesture. "Old habit. In the mountains you learn to cook for yourself or you go hungry." They ate together and the domesticity of it struck her. How easy it would be to let this become routine, to accept his help and his company without question. But nothing was that simple. He would leave eventually, back to his mountains and his solitary life, and she would be alone again, possibly worse off than before, because now she would know what she was missing. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac said, "Storm is coming, big one, by the look of those clouds. I should probably head to town, stock up before the snow hits." Disappointment crashed through her, sharp and unexpected. "Of course. You have your own preparations to make." He was quiet for a moment. "Come with me." "What? Come to town with me? You need some supplies too, more than what I can carry. And I would feel better knowing you are properly stocked before winter sets in." She wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence. But practical needs outweighed pride. He was right. She needed more than venison and coffee to survive the winter. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." They set out within the hour, Isaac on his roan and Ophelia on her old mare, Sally, who seemed delighted to finally be out of the small corral. The ride to Delta took just over 2 hours, and the first snowflakes started falling as they reached the outskirts of town. Delta was still small, barely more than a main street lined with rough board buildings, a general store, a blacksmith, a church, a saloon, and a scattering of homes. People stopped to stare as they rode in together, and Ophelia saw the calculation in their eyes. The war widow and the massive mountain man. She could practically hear the gossip starting already. Isaac seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps he simply did not care. He helped her dismount outside the general store with old-fashioned courtesy, his hands on her waist, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. The brief contact sent awareness jolting through her, and she stepped back quickly, flustered. Inside the store, the proprietor, a thin, nervous man named Clarence Hobbs, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. "Mrs. Randall, what a surprise!" "And Mr. Turner," Isaac supplied. "I need supplies. Flour, cornmeal, beans, salt, sugar, coffee, lard, and whatever dried fruit you have, enough to last the winter." "That is quite an order," Hobbs said, his eyes darting between them. "Will Mrs. Randall be paying separately or—" "One order," Isaac said firmly, pulling out a leather pouch heavy with coins. "And I want everything delivered to the Randall place by tomorrow." "Delivered? I am not sure I can spare the time." Isaac laid several gold coins on the counter with deliberate care. "Tomorrow?" Hobbs's eyes widened. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. Tomorrow morning." While Hobbs scurried around filling the order, Ophelia pulled Isaac aside. "That is too much," she whispered urgently. "I cannot accept all that." "You need it," he said simply, "and I have the money. Been saving my trapping profits for years with nothing to spend it on. But why? Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." He looked down at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "Maybe I want to know you better. Maybe I am tired of being alone in the mountains. Or maybe I just cannot stand the thought of you going hungry again." He paused. Probably all three. She did not know what to say to that. The honesty in his words disarmed her completely. Before she could formulate a response, the door to the store opened and 3 women entered, led by Martha Atkinson, the minister's wife and the town's most notorious gossip. "Ophelia Randall," Martha said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise to see you in town. And with a companion, Mrs. Atkinson," Ophelia said stiffly. "May I introduce Isaac Turner? He is a trapper who has been camping near my property." "How convenient," Martha said, her eyes traveling over Isaac's imposing form with undisguised disapproval. "And what would your dear departed husband think about strange men camping so close to his widow?" Ophelia felt anger flash through her, hot and sudden. "I imagine Matthew would be grateful that someone was looking after his wife when the rest of the town seemed content to let her starve." Martha's face reddened. "Well, I never. If you had asked for help, would you have given it?" Ophelia challenged. "Or would you have offered prayers and sympathy while doing nothing of substance?" The other women gasped. Isaac shifted beside her, a solid presence at her back. She could feel his approval like warmth from a fire. Martha drew herself up. Your behavior is most unbecoming, Mrs. Randall. People will talk. They already do, Ophelia shot back. At least now they will have something real to discuss. She turned and walked out of the store, her heart pounding. Isaac followed, and she heard him chuckling softly behind her. That was impressive, he said once they were outside. I should not have lost my temper, she said, but she could not quite regret it. For 3 years she had endured the town's pity and judgment in silence. It felt good to finally push back. Sometimes people need to hear hard truths, Isaac said, and that woman needed to hear she was being a hypocrite. They walked to the small restaurant near the edge of town, and Isaac insisted on buying her lunch. Over plates of stew and fresh bread, he asked her about her life before Matthew, about her family, her dreams. She found herself opening up in ways she had not in years, telling him about growing up in Missouri, about how she and Matthew met at a church social, about their whirlwind courtship and marriage. He sounds like a good man, Isaac said. He was. He truly was. She paused, stirring her stew. But he has been gone a long time, and I am tired of living like a ghost, waiting for something that can never be. Isaac reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, calloused, and huge enough to engulf hers completely. Then stop waiting. Start living. She looked up at him, this surprising man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a question she had not known to ask. His eyes were soft with understanding and something deeper, something that made her heart race. I do not know how anymore, she admitted. I have been surviving for so long I have forgotten what it means to actually live. Then learn again, he said gently. I will help you if you let me. The snow was falling steadily when they left town, coating the world in white. The ride back to her cabin took longer, the horses picking their way carefully through the accumulating drifts. By the time they arrived, several inches had fallen, and the temperature had dropped sharply. Isaac built up the fire while Ophelia changed into dry clothes. When she emerged from her bedroom, she found him standing at the window, watching the snowfall. In the firelight, he looked almost mythical, this massive man with his wild hair and weathered face. She realized she had stopped thinking of him as frightening. Now he just looked like Isaac, solid and dependable and surprisingly gentle. Storm is going to be bad, he said without turning. I have been watching the signs all week. We might get snowed in for a few days. Will you be able to get back to your camp? She asked. Probably not safely. If you do not mind, I should stay here until it passes. She should have minded. Should have worried about propriety and reputation and all the things Martha Atkinson would say. But all she felt was relief. I do not mind, she said. I would prefer it, actually. The cabin gets lonely in storms. He turned then, and the look he gave her made something flutter in her chest. Lonely is something I understand very well. The storm raged for 3 days. Snow piled high against the cabin walls and the wind howled like a living thing. But inside, Ophelia felt warm and safe in a way she had not since Matthew left for war. Isaac proved to be unexpectedly good company. He told her stories about his years in the mountains, about close calls with wolves and grizzlies, about the breathtaking beauty of high alpine meadows in summer. She taught him to play checkers with a set Matthew had carved from pine, and they spent hours in fierce competition that always ended in laughter. On the second night, he pulled out his harmonica again and played while she sang. Her voice was rusty from disuse, but he seemed entranced anyway. They moved from hymns to folk songs to bawdy tunes that made her blush and laugh simultaneously. It had been so long since she had laughed like that, free and genuine, until her sides ached and tears ran down her cheeks. You have a beautiful voice, Isaac said when they finally stopped, both of them breathless. Matthew was a lucky man. The mention of her husband should have felt wrong in this moment, but somehow it did not. She appreciated that Isaac did not pretend Matthew had never existed, that he acknowledged her past without being threatened by it. I miss him, she said honestly, but not the way I used to. The grief is not as sharp anymore. Is that terrible? No, Isaac said firmly. That is healthy. Grief is supposed to ease with time. That does not mean you loved him any less. Did you love Sarah, the girl who married your brother? He thought about it. I thought I did at the time. But I was young, and I was more in love with the idea of her than the reality. When I came back from the war and found out she had moved on, I was hurt more in my pride than my heart. He looked at Ophelia. I did not know what real connection felt like back then. The implication hung between them, heavy and electric. Ophelia's pulse raced. She knew what he was saying, what he was offering. Part of her wanted to run from it, to hide behind the safety of her widowhood. But a larger part, the part that was tired of being afraid and alone, wanted to reach out and grab this chance with both hands. "Isaac," she said quietly, "what are we doing here?" "I do not know," he admitted. "All I know is that I have not felt this comfortable with another person in longer than I can remember. And I think you feel it too." "I do," she whispered, "but I am frightened." "Of what?" "Of everything, of letting go of the past, of moving forward, of caring about someone again and losing them." Her voice broke. "I do not think I could survive another loss like Matthew." Isaac stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. He took her hands in his, and his touch was infinitely gentle despite his size and strength. "I cannot promise I will never leave," he said. "None of us can promise that. But I can promise that I will not leave by choice. And I can promise that if you let me, I will spend every day I have trying to make you happy." "You barely know me," she protested, even as hope bloomed in her chest. "I know enough. I know you are strong and brave and stubborn as hell. I know you make me laugh. I know being near you makes me want to be a better man." He paused. "And I know that when I think about leaving here, about going back to my mountains alone, something in me recoils at the idea. I do not want to be alone anymore, Ophelia. Not when I have found someone who makes me feel like I am home." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I do not want to be alone either, then do not be. Let me stay, not just until the storm passes, but for good. Let me help you with this homestead, help you build the life you and Matthew dreamed of. Let me be your partner in all of this." It was too fast, too soon. She had known him less than a week, but somehow it also felt inevitable, like they had been moving toward this moment since he first emerged from the trees by the creek. "What if people talk?" she asked. "What if they say terrible things? Let them. We will know the truth, and that is all that matters." She looked into his gray eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. This man, this unexpected gift, was offering her a future. Not a replacement for what she had lost, but something new and precious. She could either accept it or spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. "Yes," she said, the word coming out as a sob and a laugh simultaneously. "Yes, stay, please stay." Isaac's face broke into a smile so wide and genuine it transformed him completely. He looked young suddenly, almost boyish despite his size and scars. He pulled her into his arms and she went willingly, pressing her face against his broad chest and breathing in his scent of pine and wood smoke and something uniquely him. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "Thank you for giving me this chance." They held each other for a long time, the storm raging outside while they created their own shelter within the cabin walls. When they finally pulled apart, Ophelia felt lighter than she had in years, like some massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The third day of the storm dawned clear and bright. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, and the world outside was transformed into something magical. Everything sparkled with pristine white, and the sun reflecting off the snow was almost blinding. Isaac went outside first, plowing through drifts that came up to his thighs in places. He dug out the cabin door and created a path to the well in the chicken coop. Ophelia followed, marveling at the beauty around her. The trees hung heavy with snow, and icicles dangled from the cabin eaves like crystals. "Delivery wagon will not make it out here for days," Isaac observed, looking at the snow-choked road. "But we have enough to last until they can get through." "I am not worried," Ophelia said, and realized it was true. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like something to dread, but something to anticipate. They spent the day digging out, and Isaac started talking about plans for the homestead. He wanted to expand the chicken coop, maybe add some pigs in the spring. They could enlarge the garden, put in more potatoes and squash that would store well through winter. And he was good with a forge. He could make tools and repair equipment. Ophelia listened to him talk, his enthusiasm infectious, and found herself getting excited about possibilities she had thought dead and buried. With Isaac's help, the homestead could thrive. She would not have to struggle alone anymore. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Isaac pulled something from his pack, a small leather-bound book, its pages worn and yellowed. "I am not much for words," he said, "but I write sometimes. Mostly observations about the mountains, the animals. Thoughts I need to get out of my head." He handed her the book. "I want you to have this, so you can know who I am, what I think about." Ophelia took the book carefully, touched by the gesture. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. No secrets between us. I want you to know me, all of me." She opened the book to a random page and read his strong, slightly awkward handwriting. He described a sunset over the high peaks, the way the alpenglow turned the snow to molten gold. His words were simple but beautiful, filled with a reverence for nature that moved her. This is wonderful, she said sincerely. You have a poet's eye. He flushed, color rising beneath his beard. It is just ramblings. It is more than that. It is how you see the world. And it is beautiful. They sat close together, and Ophelia continued reading while Isaac played soft melodies on his harmonica. Outside, the stars came out, brilliant in the cold, clear air. Inside, two lonely people had found each other and chosen to build something new together. That night, before they retired to their separate sleeping areas, Isaac took her hand. I want to do this properly, he said. Court you the right way. I know we are rushing into things, but I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated. I do not feel pressured, she assured him. But I appreciate that you want to take time. Good. Because you deserve to be courted, Ophelia. You deserve romance and sweetness and all the things war and loss took from you. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her throat tight with emotion. Then he went to his bedroll by the fire, and she retreated to her room, her hands still tingling from his kiss. The supply wagon arrived 5 days later, bringing enough food and provisions to stock her pantry completely. The shelves that had been empty for so long now groaned under the weight of flour and beans and preserved fruits. Ophelia stood in front of them, tears running down her face, and felt overwhelming gratitude. Isaac came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into his strength, marveling at how natural this felt already, how right. Never again, he murmured. Never again will you go hungry or be without. I promise you that. She turned in his arms and reached up to cup his bearded face. I know. I trust you. I love you, Ophelia, he said, the words simple and direct. I know it is soon, but I am too old and have been alone too long to play games. I love you, and I want to build a life with you. I love you too, she said, and realized with wonder that it was true. Somewhere between his arrival and this moment, she had fallen completely in love with this gentle giant of a man. I love you, Isaac Turner. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kisses she had shared with Matthew during their brief courtship. This was hungry and desperate and full of promise. She melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, and let herself feel everything she had been denying for so long. Want, need, hope, love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. I know we have not known each other long, but I am certain about this, about you. Marry me, Ophelia. She should have asked for more time. Should have been practical and cautious. But she had been practical and cautious her whole life, and where had it gotten her? Alone and starving in a cabin full of ghosts. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Delta, with most of the town in attendance. Martha Atkinson looked disapproving, but plenty of other faces showed genuine happiness for them. The minister, a kind man named Reverend Peters, gave a moving sermon about second chances and the importance of opening one's heart to new love. Ophelia wore a dress she had made herself from fabric. Isaac bought her in town, a deep green that matched her eyes. Isaac had trimmed his beard and tied back his hair, and in his clean shirt and vest he looked almost civilized, though his size and presence still dominated the small church. When he took her hands and made his vows, his voice was steady and sure. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you for as long as I live. I promise to make you laugh, to listen when you talk, and to never let you face hardship alone. You are my heart, Ophelia, and I will spend the rest of my days showing you that. She spoke her own vows through tears, promising to love him in return, to build a life with him, to honor the gift they had been given in finding each other. When Reverend Peters pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her thoroughly, to the amusement and slight scandal of the congregation. Ophelia did not care. She was happy, truly and completely happy. For the first time in years, they held a small reception at the cabin, with a few neighbors attending. Isaac had built more furniture in the weeks leading up to the wedding, and the cabin felt more spacious and comfortable than it ever had. He had also expanded it, adding a proper bedroom and a bigger kitchen. The place was starting to feel less like a memorial and more like a home. That night, alone together as husband and wife, Isaac carried her over the threshold of their bedroom with ease. He was gentle with her, patient, taking his time to relearn her body and help her feel safe. It had been years since she had been intimate with anyone, and he seemed to understand her nervousness. We have all the time in the world, he murmured against her skin. No need to rush anything. But Ophelia found that her nervousness faded quickly under his tender attention. Isaac made her feel cherished, desired, beautiful. and when they finally came together, it felt like a homecoming, like two pieces of a puzzle, slotting perfectly into place. Afterward, wrapped in his arms with her head on his chest, she listened to his heartbeat and felt profoundly grateful. Life had taken so much from her, but it had also given her this unexpected gift, this second chance at love, at happiness, at building a future. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Isaac asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For being exactly what I needed, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," he replied. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in years, Ophelia did not dream of war and loss. Instead, she dreamed of spring, of planting new gardens, of building a life filled with love and laughter. The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Isaac proved to be everything he had promised and more. He was hard-working, rising before dawn to tend to the animals and chop wood. He was gentle with her, always considerate of her feelings and needs. And he made her laugh every single day, whether with his dry humor or his surprising clumsiness when he tried to help with delicate tasks. He also proved surprisingly domestic. He could cook better than she expected, and he took genuine pleasure in small household tasks. She would catch him humming while he mended tack or polished her dishes, and her heart would swell with affection. For her part, Ophelia threw herself into being a true partner. She helped plan improvements to the homestead, offered her opinions on what crops to plant, and worked alongside him whenever possible. She also started singing again, really singing, and the cabin was often filled with music in the evenings. By January, she realized she was pregnant. She told Isaac on a snowy afternoon, nervous about his reaction. They had not discussed children, and she worried he might not be ready, but his face lit up with pure joy. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could clearly see he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, setting her down carefully and placing a large hand on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Ophelia. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning. I could not ask for more." The pregnancy was easy, and Isaac was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or work too hard in the garden. He brought her wildflowers whenever he went hunting, and he talked to her belly every night, telling their unborn child stories about the mountains and the adventures they would have together. Their son was born in September of 1868 during a warm golden afternoon. Isaac held Ophelia's hand through the labor, never once looking away or flinching, no matter how hard she squeezed. When the midwife finally placed their baby in Ophelia's arms, she looked down at his tiny red face and felt her heart expand impossibly large. "What should we name him?" she asked Isaac, who was staring at the baby with wonder. "I was thinking about Matthew," Isaac said quietly. "To honor your first husband, he should be remembered, Ophelia. He brought you here, and without him I never would have found you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "That is perfect, Matthew Turner. Matt for short." They spent hours just watching their son sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and perfect little nose. Isaac was a natural father, patient and gentle despite his size. He learned to change nappies and swaddle the baby with the same careful attention he applied to everything else. And when Matt cried in the night, Isaac was always the first to wake, scooping up his son and pacing the cabin floor until the baby settled. Ophelia watched him with their child and fell in love with him all over again. This man who had appeared out of nowhere and filled not just her pantry, but her entire life had given her more than she ever dreamed possible. As Matt grew, the homestead prospered. Isaac was an expert trapper and hunter, and his furs brought good money. They expanded the farm, adding cattle and more chickens. The garden flourished under Ophelia's care, and they had more than enough to see them through each winter, with plenty to sell or trade in town. 2 years later, they had another child, a daughter they named Isabel Ruth. She had Isaac's gray eyes and Ophelia's auburn hair, and she was strong-willed from birth, demanding attention with lungs that could be heard across the property. "She is going to be trouble," Isaac said with undisguised pride as he rocked his infant daughter. "She is her father's child," Ophelia teased. "Stubborn and impossible, and her mother's," he shot back. "Beautiful and brave." Their family continued to grow. In 1872, they had another son, Jonathan, who was quiet and thoughtful, and in 1874, twin girls arrived, Alice and Emma, who kept them all running from the moment they could crawl. The cabin expanded along with their family. Isaac built additional rooms, then eventually a second story. The place that had once felt like a prison of memories became a home filled with laughter and life and love. Ophelia sometimes thought about those dark days before Isaac arrived, when she had been starving and hopeless, wondering if she would survive the winter. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. The woman she was now bore little resemblance to that hollow-eyed widow. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised her with a gift. He had been mysteriously busy for weeks, disappearing for hours at a time. On the morning of their anniversary, he led her outside, their children trailing behind in excitement. There in the meadow beyond the house stood a brand-new barn, massive and beautifully constructed. But that was not the surprise. Next to it, Isaac had built a smaller building with large windows. "What is it?" Ophelia asked, confused. "Your workshop," he said with a grin. "I know you have been wanting space to work on chocolates and sewing without the children getting into everything. Now you have it." She walked inside and found that he had built her shelves for fabric, a large cutting table, and even a new sewing machine that must have cost a fortune. Tears flooded her eyes. "Isaac, this is too much. It is not nearly enough," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You gave me a life, Ophelia. You gave me a family and a home and more happiness than I thought possible. A workshop is the least I can do in return." She turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into it. Their children giggled and made faces, and Isaac laughed against her mouth. "I love you," she said, "more than I can ever express." "I know," he said, "because I feel the same way, every single day." They stood there together, surrounded by the life they had built, and Ophelia sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For the man who had appeared when she needed him most, for the family they had created, for second chances and new beginnings. Life was not always easy. They faced hardships as everyone did, drought years and hard winters, illness that took neighbors and friends, the challenges of raising 5 energetic children. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Matthew, their oldest, grew into a fine young man, thoughtful and kind. He had his namesake's sense of duty and Isaac's steady strength. Isabel became a force of nature, organizing her siblings and running the household with efficiency by the time she was 12. Jonathan inherited Isaac's love of the mountains and spent as much time as possible exploring the high country. The twins, Alice and Emma, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into more mischief than the other 3 children combined. Isaac proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving but firm when necessary. He taught the boys to hunt and trap, to read the weather and track animals. He taught the girls that they were just as capable as any boy, showing them how to shoot and ride and stand up for themselves. And he loved Ophelia with a consistency and devotion that never wavered. For her part, Ophelia found joy in motherhood and in the community she and Isaac built. Their home became a gathering place for neighbors, always open for meals and conversation. She started a small school, teaching not just her own children but others from nearby farms. And she continued to sing, her voice filling their home with music that her children would remember their whole lives. The years passed in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Birthdays and holidays, first steps and first words, childhood illnesses and scraped knees. Isaac and Ophelia weathered it all together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On their 20th anniversary, they took a rare trip away from the homestead, leaving the older children in charge of the younger ones. They rode up into the mountains to a place Isaac had discovered years before, a high alpine meadow surrounded by peaks, with a crystal-clear lake reflecting the sky. They made camp and spent 3 days alone together, rediscovering each other away from the demands of family and farm. They talked for hours, reminiscing about their early days together, marveling at how far they had come. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked one night as they lay beneath the stars. "Marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to a mountain man with no prospects?" "Never," Ophelia said firmly. "Not once. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Isaac Turner. You gave me back my life. You gave me mine," he said, pulling her closer. "I was just existing before I met you, not really living. You showed me what it means to have a home, to belong somewhere." They made love under the stars, and it was just as passionate and tender as their first time. 20 years had not diminished their desire for each other, only deepened it, adding layers of history and intimacy. The ride back to the homestead felt bittersweet, a return to reality after a perfect escape. But when they crested the final hill and saw their home spread out below, children playing in the yard and smoke rising from the chimney, Ophelia felt nothing but contentment. "This is everything I ever wanted," she said softly. "Me too," Isaac agreed. "More than I even knew to want." Their children grew and eventually began families of their own. Matthew married a sweet girl from town and took over running the farm. Isabel became a teacher, inspired by her mother's example. Jonathan moved to the high country, becoming a guide and trapper like his father. The twins both married brothers from a neighboring ranch and remained as inseparable as ever. Isaac and Ophelia became grandparents, and they threw themselves into the role with enthusiasm. Their home was always filled with grandchildren, and Isaac proved to be just as patient and loving with them as he had been with his own children. Ophelia would watch him playing with the little ones, this massive man gentle as a lamb with babies in his arms, and her heart would overflow with love. They grew old together, their hair turning gray and their movements slowing. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by decades of shared life. On their 40th anniversary, Isaac took Ophelia back to the place where they had first met, the creek where he had appeared like something out of a dream. They sat on the bank, holding hands, and watched the water flow past. "I was dying when you found me," Ophelia said quietly. "Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. I had given up." "I know," Isaac said. "I saw it in your eyes that first day, and I saw my own reflection there. We saved each other, Ophelia." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had ridden past, if you had not stopped?" "Never," he said firmly, "because I believe we were meant to find each other. Call it fate or God's plan or just luck, but we were supposed to meet. I am certain of that." "Me too," she agreed. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence as only people who have shared decades together can be. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, and birds sang in the branches above them. "I would do it all again," Ophelia said eventually. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy. I would choose you 1,000 times over." Isaac lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, the same gesture he had made on the night he proposed. "And I would choose you, always you." Isaac lived to be 73 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night. Ophelia woke to find him gone, his hand still in hers, a small smile on his face. She held him and cried, mourning the loss of her partner, her love, her everything. But she did not fall apart as she had when Matthew died. Isaac had taught her to be strong, to keep living even in the face of loss. She mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the incredible life they had built together. 42 years of marriage, 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and more love than most people experienced in 3 lifetimes. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by family, tending her garden, and singing to her great-grandchildren. On quiet nights, she would sit on the porch and talk to Isaac, telling him about their children and grandchildren, about the changes in the world, about how much she missed him. When her own time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by loved ones. Her last words were, "I am coming, Isaac. Wait for me." They buried her next to him on the hill overlooking their homestead, the place they had built together from nothing. Our children made sure the graves were well tended, and the family continued to gather there every year on their anniversary, telling stories about the couple who had loved each other so fiercely and completely. The homestead remained in the family for generations, passed down to Matthew's children and then to his grandchildren. And everyone who lived there knew the story of how it was founded. How a starving widow had been saved by a mountain man who appeared out of nowhere. How he had filled her empty pantry without a word, asking nothing in return. How that simple act of kindness had grown into a love story that lasted a lifetime. The original cabin still stood, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. And on the wall inside, Matthew's grandson hung a carefully preserved piece of paper that had been found in Isaac's belongings after his death. It was a page from his journal, dated October 1867, written the night after he first met Ophelia. It read, "Met a woman today at the creek. Widow named Ophelia Randall. She is starving and alone and trying so hard to be brave. I saw something in her eyes that I recognized. The same emptiness that has been eating at me for years. But I also saw strength and beauty and a will to survive that took my breath away. I think I am going to stay here for a while. I think maybe I was meant to find her. God knows I have been wandering long enough. Maybe it is time to stop running and start living. Maybe she is the reason I have been so lost. So I could be found by her." Below that, in Ophelia's elegant handwriting, someone had added her own note, found in her Bible after her death. "Isaac Turner was the answer to prayers I was too proud to pray. He saw me when I felt invisible. He loved me when I felt unlovable. He gave me back my life and filled it with more joy than I imagined possible. If I could go back to that morning when I found my pantry empty, when I sat on the floor and cried and thought I could not go on, I would tell that broken woman to hold on just one more day. Because miracles do happen, and sometimes they come in the form of a mountain man on a roan horse appearing out of nowhere with kindness in his eyes and love in his heart. Wait for him, I would say. He is coming, and he will change everything. And that was the truth of it. Isaac had changed everything. He had filled Ophelia's pantry, yes, but more importantly, he had filled her life. With love and laughter, with children and grandchildren, with purpose and joy. He had given her a second chance at happiness, and she had given him the same. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a legacy of love that continued long after they were gone. Their story became legend in Delta, Colorado, passed down through generations. People spoke of the war widow and the mountain man who had loved her, of the family they had built, of the example they had set. Young couples getting married would visit their graves, hoping some of that legendary love would bless their own unions. And every fall, when the aspen turned gold and the first snow dusted the high peaks, when the air smelled of wood smoke and pine, people remembered. They remembered that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that second chances were real, that sometimes, when life seemed darkest, hope appeared in the form of a stranger who filled your empty spaces with light. Ophelia's great-great-grandchildren still lived on the homestead, farming the same land their ancestors had carved from the wilderness. The cabin had been expanded and modernized, but the bones of it remained. The pantry that had once been empty was always full now, a deliberate choice to honor the woman who had nearly starved and the man who had refused to let her. Every year on October 15th, the anniversary of the day Isaac and Ophelia met, the family held a gathering. They cooked a feast using recipes passed down from Ophelia, and they told stories about their remarkable ancestors. The children always asked to hear about how great-great-great-grandpa Isaac had filled great-great-great-grandma Ophelia's pantry, and the adults obliged, embellishing details but keeping the heart of the story true, because at its core, it was a simple story. A story about kindness and connection, about seeing someone in need and choosing to help, about two broken people finding each other and choosing to heal together, about love that transcended circumstance and grew stronger with every passing year. It was a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth honoring, and as long as the family remained on that land, as long as the cabin stood and the mountains watched over the valley, Isaac and Ophelia's love story would continue, a testament to the power of compassion, the possibility of second chances, and the enduring strength of two hearts that chose each other against all odds. In the end, that was their legacy. Not just the land or the children or the homestead they had built, but the love itself, pure and strong and true. A love that had started with a simple act of filling an empty pantry and grown into something that lasted beyond lifetimes. A love that proved, once and for all, that it was never too late to start again. Never too late to let someone in, never too late to choose hope over despair, connection over isolation, love over loneliness. Isaac and Ophelia had chosen each other, and in doing so, they had chosen life. Full, rich, beautiful life, and that choice had made all the difference.